The day after Nora Vass turned 59, her stepdaughter changed the locks. The day after Nora Vass turned 59, her stepdaughter changed the locks. There had been no argument that morning, no raised voices. Nora had come downstairs at 6:45 the way she always did, put the kettle on, and found a manila envelope on the kitchen table with her name written in Deanna's careful block letters. Inside, a notarized letter from a law firm in Harrisburg, a list of personal items that had been boxed and left in the carport, and a check for $800 made out to Nora J. Vass, signed by Deanna's husband, Craig. The kettle started to scream. Nora turned it off. She had lived in that house for 11 years, first as Gerald Burkett's wife, and then, after Gerald died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday in March, as the woman who kept the gutters clean and the pantry stocked and drove Deanna's youngest to soccer twice a week. She had not been Gerald's wife for very long, 4 years and change. But she had been useful, and she had believed, in the quiet way that practical people believe things, that usefulness was its own kind of permanence. It was not. She stood in the carport for a long time. Her boxes were stacked on a blue tarp. 7 of them. The largest held her mother's cast-iron skillet, a quilt her aunt had made in 1987, and a shoebox of photographs. The smallest held her reading glasses, 2 paperback novels, and a bottle of ibuprofen. She had $214 in her checking account and no particular place to go. But there was a place. There had always been a place, technically, though she had not thought of it seriously in years. A property in Dunmore County. A cider mill her grandmother Estelle had left to Nora in a handwritten codicil that a lawyer named Hargrove had filed quietly, without fanfare, and then seemingly forgotten. Nora had forgotten it too, or nearly. A building on a gravel road off County Road 4, outside a town called Harland Springs. She had not been there since she was 31. She loaded her boxes into the back of her Subaru Forester, a 2009 with a cracked dashboard mount and 178,000 miles on it, and she drove. But when she pried open the floor panel beneath the old pressing room, she found something her grandmother had spent 31 years quietly building. Something that Deanna Burkett's lawyers had spent just as long making sure Nora would never find. The lawyer's name was Dennis Platt, and he had a habit of clicking his pen, not nervously, but methodically, as if the sound helped him think. He was a compact man in his mid-60s with silver hair combed flat and a pair of reading glasses he wore pushed up on his forehead even when he wasn't reading. His office was on the 4th floor of a glass building in Harrisburg, and the carpet was the color of old moss. Nora had driven there 3 days after Gerald's funeral at the suggestion of Gerald's brother, who had seemed genuinely sorry about the situation, even as he explained that the estate was more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Gerald had updated his will 18 months before his death. The house, the investment accounts, the timeshare in Myrtle Beach. All of it went to Deanna, his daughter from his first marriage, held in a trust managed by her husband Craig, until such time as the trust dissolved. Nora had not known about the updated will. She was not sure Gerald had known she didn't know. Platt had explained this to her with the careful gentleness of a man who had explained it many times before. He clicked his pen twice. He told her that as Gerald's surviving spouse, she had certain rights under Pennsylvania law, that there would be an elective share calculation, that the process would take several months. He slid a yellow legal pad across the desk and asked her to list her assets. She wrote, 2009 Subaru Forester. Personal belongings, est value $800. Possible interest in inherited property, Harland Springs, Dunmore County. Platt looked at the last line. What kind of property? A cider mill. My grandmother left it to me. I think there's a deed somewhere. He asked for the name of the estate. She told him. He wrote it down without expression, but he turned his pen over in his hand once, which was the only time during the meeting that the clicking stopped. The elective share process took 4 months. At the end of it, after legal fees, Nora received a check for $6,200 and a letter confirming that her right of election had been satisfied. The house was Deanna's. The accounts were Deanna's. The timeshare, which Nora had never visited and did not want, was Deanna's. Nora signed what she was told to sign and drove home to Deanna's house, where she lived for another 2 years, quietly, making herself useful, paying attention to the gutters. Now she drove away from it for the last time. She took I-78 east to 81 north, then cut west on Route 11 through country that opened up and flattened, and then hillied again as she got deeper into Dunmore County. The towns got smaller. The gas stations got fewer. She stopped at a Sheetz outside Millerton for a coffee and a prepackaged egg sandwich, and ate in the parking lot with the engine running, watching a pair of teenagers in a jacked-up pickup argue about something she couldn't hear. The sandwich was $3.89. She paid cash. She got back on 11 and then turned onto County Road 4, just past the Harland Springs Township sign, which was green with white lettering and had a crack running through it where someone had clipped it at some point, and the township had simply left it. The road was paved for the first half-mile and then gravel, and then the gravel got sparse enough that it was really just a dirt track between 2 lines of second-growth maples. The forester's suspension said what it thought about this. She found the property at 4:22 in the afternoon. She recognized the shape of it before she recognized the details. A long, low building with a metal roof and a small attached structure on the north side that she remembered was called the pressing room, though she had not thought that word in decades. The apple orchard was still there, or what remained of it, a line of old trees running back from the road on both sides, unkempt and heavily branched, the grass beneath them tall and going to seed. The fence that had divided the orchard from the gravel lot was mostly down, 3 posts out of 12 still standing. But the front door hinges were oiled. That was the first thing that didn't fit. The door itself was weathered gray, the paint long since peeled to bare wood on the lower panels, and the hardware was old, a thumb latch and a bar hasp of a type she hadn't seen since childhood. But both hinges had been wiped clean and oiled recently enough that there was still a faint amber sheen on the knuckles. Someone had been here. Not recently enough to matter, but recently enough. She parked in the gravel lot and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she got out. The front door opened without resistance, which surprised her. She had expected to fight it, and swung back on those clean hinges without a sound to reveal the main room of the mill. A space roughly 30 feet by 40 with a poured concrete floor and exposed timber framing overhead. The ceiling joists were 8 by 8 Douglas fir, hand-hewn, the adze marks still visible on the broad faces. The walls were board and batten pine, grayed with age, some boards warped and pulling away from the battens, but none of them rotted through. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. To her left was the old press, a rack and cloth hydraulic unit, she believed, though she hadn't thought about cider presses since she was a girl, and might have been misremembering the type. The frame was cast iron with a central screw mechanism that rose to a crossbeam bolted to the ceiling joists, and the whole thing was draped in an old canvas tarp that had gone brittle at the edges and cracked at the folds. To her right, 3 long tables made of rough 2-inch pine planks on sawhorses, a row of wooden apple crates stacked 6 high against the far wall, and a window set high in the east wall that let in a wedge of late light the color of weak tea. She walked through. The small door at the back of the main room opened into a narrow hallway, and off the hallway were 2 rooms, a cold storage room that still had its original shelving, steel angle iron brackets with pine boards, and a room her grandmother had used as an office, maybe 10 by 12, with a roll-top desk pushed against the window and a ladder-back chair and nothing else. The desk was locked. She didn't touch it yet. At the end of the hallway was the pressing room door, and beyond it, the pressing room itself. A concrete floored space, maybe 16 by 20, with floor drains, and a sloped ceiling and a rusted Hobart-style mixer on a wheeled stand in one corner that looked as though it hadn't moved in 30 years. One of the floor drains had a cracked ceramic collar. The walls had been painted at some point, a pale yellow that had since gone to cream, and then to nothing in patches. She went back to the office. She found a kettle and a single-burner camp stove on the cold storage shelf, and a tin of instant coffee that was still sealed. She heated water. She found a chipped mug on the second shelf down and rinsed it in the utility sink off the hallway, which had cold running water at least. The pipes knocked when she opened the tap but held. She made her coffee and stood drinking it in the main room in the late light. Then she went back to her car and got her peanut butter. She ate standing at one of the long pine tables, peanut butter on the heel of a bread loaf she'd bought 2 days ago, washing it down with the instant coffee, watching the light die in the east window. She had $206 left. She made a bed out of the back seat of the Forester, using the 1987 quilt and her coat, and slept better than she expected. The next morning, she started walking the building in earnest. She had brought a flashlight, a mag light, the long 4D cell kind, heavy enough to use as a pry bar if necessary, which her father had always said was the only kind worth owning. She ran it along the baseboards of the main room, along the junction of the board and batten walls and the concrete floor, looking at the way things sat. Most of it was what she expected. Gaps at the base of some boards where the floor had settled, mouse evidence in the corners, a section of concrete near the east wall that had heaved slightly along a crack that probably ran back to frost damage. She spent the morning on the roof. She climbed up using an aluminum extension ladder she found folded against the outside of the pressing room, and walked the full metal surface, checking for lifted seams and loose screws. She found 14 places where the roofing screws had backed out and the neoprene washers had deteriorated. She did not have the tools or the screws to fix any of it yet, but she wrote it down in a small spiral notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. She also wrote down the oiled hinges, which she had not stopped thinking about. In the afternoon, she worked her way back through the pressing room. She was on her knees checking the base of the south wall when her flashlight caught something. The baseboard along the south wall of the pressing room was pine, 2x6 stock, same as everywhere else in the building. But there was a section, maybe 40 inches long, running from a point about 3 feet left of the utility door to a point near the corner, where the baseboard sat differently. Not visibly differently. You would not notice it standing. But on her knees with the flashlight held flat to the floor, she could see that the gap between the baseboard and the concrete was slightly wider on the left end and narrower on the right, suggesting the board had been removed and replaced rather than installed in a single continuous piece. She pressed on it with her palm. Nothing. She pressed harder, near the right end, and felt the tiniest amount of flex. Old pine baseboard is not supposed to flex. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a long time. She went to her car and got a pry bar from the kit bag she kept in the back, a 17-inch flat bar, the Est-wing, with a straight end and a slight curve at the hook. She came back and knelt in front of the baseboard again and worked the straight end of the bar into the gap at the right corner, using a folded piece of the canvas tarp as a cushion against the concrete to protect the baseboard face. She applied pressure slowly. The board resisted, then gave a sound. Not a crack, not a pop, but a soft mechanical click, like a latch releasing. And the whole 40-inch section hinged open on its left end, swinging away from the wall and revealing a space in the concrete block behind it, roughly 16 inches wide and 12 inches tall and 24 inches deep. She sat very still. Then she put the flashlight in and looked. There was a tin box, the kind that had once held fruitcake or Christmas candy. the lid pressed on tight enough that the seam had gone the color of the metal around it. There was a small leather journal, the cover darkened with handling, a rubber band around it that crumbled to pieces when she touched it. There was a brass key on a ring with a tag that read, in faded ink, Roll Top, EV. And there was a bundle of envelopes, maybe a dozen, tied with white cotton kitchen twine that had gone stiff with age. She sat on the pressing room floor with her legs straight in front of her and the flashlight across her lap. She picked up the tin box first. She worked the lid free with her thumbs. It took real effort. The lid had sealed itself with years of pressure. And when it opened, she found, inside, a single white envelope with her name on it. Not her married name. Not Nora Burkett. Nora Vass. The handwriting was her grandmother Estelle's. She would have known it anywhere. The tall, careful capital N. The looping doubles S. She sat there for a moment with the envelope in both hands, not opening it, just holding it. Then she worked her thumbnail under the flap, which had not been sealed, only folded and pressed, and she took out the single sheet of paper inside. It was dated September 14th, 14 years ago. Nora, if you're reading this, you found the panel. I always believed you would, given enough time and the right kind of trouble. You always noticed the things that sat wrong. You got that from your father, not from me, but I'll claim it anyway. There are more letters. There are more things. This one is just to tell you that I knew you'd come, and I'm glad you did. The mill is yours. It has always been yours. I put it in the codicil of my will because I didn't trust the main document to hold. Your Uncle Raymond was already talking to lawyers by then, and Raymond has always believed that anything without his name on it is a mistake waiting to be corrected. The codicil is filed with Hargrove and Associates in Millerton, which may not mean anything to you, but a man named George Hargrove filed it himself in August of '97, and he is a careful man. What I need you to know, the thing I couldn't put in a legal document, is that this place is paid for 3 times over. There is more here than the building. There is more here than you know. Follow the key. I loved you, Nora. I have always loved you. The rest is in the letters. Estelle P.S. The roll top opens smooth if you lift the lid and push left first. It sticks otherwise. Nora sat on the pressing room floor and read the letter again. Then she set it on her knee and pressed the back of her hand against her eyes. Outside, the old apple trees were moving in a light wind she hadn't felt all day. She sat there a long time. 9:32 p.m. The morning came in gray and still. Nora woke in the back of the Forester with the quilt pulled up to her chin and her breath fogging the rear window. Her back ached in the specific way that came from sleeping with her knees bent, a dull pull from her left hip to her shoulder blade that she knew would loosen once she moved around. She lay still for a moment anyway, listening. Wind in the apple trees. A woodpecker somewhere in the second-growth maples along the road, working the same spot over and over with mechanical patience. Nothing else. She sat up and found her glasses. The tin box was on the front passenger seat where she'd put it the night before, the letter folded back inside it, the lid pressed shut. She looked at it for a moment, then looked away. Some things needed daylight and coffee before you could sit with them properly. She heated water on the camp stove just inside the mill's front door, crouching over it while the morning came through the high east window in a thin bar of pale light that moved across the concrete floor, as slow as a clock hand. She drank her instant coffee standing up and ate the last of the bread heel with the last of the peanut butter, scraping the jar with the handle of a plastic spoon she found in the cold storage room. Outside, a thin mist sat in the low places between the apple trees, the kind that burns off by 9. She had $206. She had a key with a tag that said Roll Top, EV. She washed the mug in the utility sink, dried it on her jacket hem, and went to the office. The roll-top desk was a big one, a double pedestal unit with maybe 48 inches of writing surface and a tambour cover that had swollen shut with humidity at some point in the past decade. Nora stood in front of it for a moment, then remembered what the letter had said. She gripped the bottom edge of the tambour, lifted slightly, and pushed left. The tambour rolled back smooth and easy, releasing a smell of cedar and old paper, and something she couldn't name. Not quite dust, not quite wood. Something drier and more specific, like the inside of a clock. The desk surface was clear except for a blotter. Green felt on a cardboard backing, the felt worn thin at the center. And a small clay pot shaped like an apple that held 3 pencils, their erasers gone to hard nubs. The drawers were locked, all 4 of them, 2 on each pedestal. She tried the brass key from the tin box. It turned in the top left drawer on the first try. Inside that drawer, a folded survey map, a rubber-banded packet of papers she didn't open yet, and a small tin of throat lozenges that rattled when she moved it. She set those on the blotter. She tried the key in the other 3 drawers. It opened all of them. The top right held a spiral-bound ledger. The cover marked 1991-2003 in black marker, and below it a second ledger marked 2003-2009. She set both on the blotter. The bottom 2 drawers held file folders, a dozen of them, labeled in the same tall, careful hand as the letter. She didn't read the labels yet. She needed to get into town. Harlan Springs was 6 miles up County Road 4, past a covered bridge that had been reinforced with steel I-beams at some point without anyone removing the original timber cladding, so it looked like a covered bridge from the outside and felt driving through it. Like driving through a covered bridge, though technically it wasn't anymore. Past the bridge the road widened and got its asphalt back, and within a quarter-mile the first houses appeared. White clapboard, deep porches, propane tanks on the side lots, American flags in various states of weathering. The town proper was 2 blocks. A hardware store, a diner, a post office the size of a 2-car garage, a farm co-op with a gravel lot full of seed bags, and a hand-lettered sign advertising mulch by the cubic yard. There was a barbershop with a pole, which surprised her, and a building that had once been a 5 and dime and was now, based on the signage, a tax preparation office open only during February and March. She parked in front of the hardware store because she needed wood screws and a tube of roofing sealant and a box of those neoprene washered roofing screws, the ones that don't back out in freeze-thaw cycles, and because hardware stores in small towns are usually run by people who know everything about everything within a 10-mile radius, and she needed to know things. The bell over the door was a real bell, not electronic, a brass dome bell on a coiled spring, the kind that rings once on the way in and once on the way out. The store smelled like linseed oil and rubber and the particular metallic cold of a space that gets chilly in the mornings and never fully warms. Behind the counter was a woman. She was somewhere in her mid-60s, compact and deliberate in the way of people who have spent decades working with their hands without wasting motion. Her hair was cut short and gone fully silver, and she wore a canvas apron over a flannel shirt, the apron pockets bulging with a pencil stub, a measuring tape, and what appeared to be a small combination square. She was writing something in a ledger, not a computer, an actual ledger, and she did not look up right away. Nora stood at the counter and waited. The woman finished her line, capped her pen, and looked up. Her eyes were gray and level, and took Nora in without apparent judgment. The worn jacket, the hair not brushed well enough this morning, the pry bar sticking out of the canvas bag over Nora's shoulder. "Roofing screws," Nora said, "the kind with the neoprene washer. Number 10, I think, maybe number 12. And a tube of geocell. And I need 3-inch number 10 wood screws, if you have them in a small box." The woman nodded once and came out from behind the counter without speaking. She led Nora down the third aisle, pulled a box of Buildex metal roofing screws. Number 12, hex head, neoprene washer. off the shelf without looking at the label, and set them in Nora's hand. Then the tube of geocell from the sealant section. Then a small 1-pound box of number 10 by 3-inch wood screws from the fasteners bin. Metal roof, older building, she said. 1960s, maybe older. The screws have backed out in maybe 14 places. 14 places you found, probably 22 total. She didn't say it unkindly. Use a nut driver, not a drill. The old metal fatigues at the hole if you over-torque. I know, Nora said. The woman looked at her again. You're out at Estelle's mill. It was not a question. Nora said yes. The woman was quiet for a moment. She looked at the Estwing pry bar in Nora's bag and at Nora's hands, which were not soft hands. Then she said, I'm Marta Fenn. I knew your grandmother. Marta Fenn had known Estelle Vass for 32 years. From the summer, Estelle moved to Harlan Springs permanently. She had kept an apartment in Allentown until her mid-50s and used the mill as a weekend and seasonal operation, until Estelle died in October, 9 years ago, at the age of 81, in the upstairs room of the house on Pickle Road that she had rented from the Gerber family for 24 years without ever buying. Because as Marta said in the particular flat tone of someone quoting a well-worn line, Estelle always said a rented house is a house you can leave. They were standing in the small back room of the hardware store where Marta kept a 2-burner electric hot plate and a French press and a shelf of mismatched mugs, because after Nora paid for her supplies, $34.17 in total, Marta had said, "You want coffee?" which was not exactly a question either, and Nora had followed her back. Marta poured without measuring. She sat on a 3-legged stool by the hot plate and let Nora have the only chair. Estelle talked about you, Marta said. Not constantly. She wasn't the type. But now and then. What did she say? Marta considered. She said you had her father's eyes and your mother's stubbornness and that you'd be all right eventually. She looked into her mug. She wasn't wrong about the stubbornness, I'd guess. Nora didn't answer. She also said, Marta continued, that there was going to come a time when you needed the mill and you'd find your way to it. She seemed fairly certain about that. A pause. She wasn't a mystical woman, your grandmother, so when she said a thing like that, she generally meant she'd arranged for it. Nora turned her mug in her hands. What do you know about the desk, the roll top in the office? Marta looked up. Her gray eyes held on Nora for a moment. Then she stood, went to a drawer in the workbench at the back of the room, and came back with a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table without ceremony. She gave me that to give to whoever came, Marta said. I've been holding it for 9 years. I was starting to wonder. Nora didn't open the paper yet. Did you know what was in the desk? Some of it. Marta sat back on her stool. Enough. And you didn't tell anyone? Marta looked at her steadily. Who would I tell? Nora folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket. She finished her coffee. Marta refilled the mug without being asked. Before Nora left, Marta opened a cabinet below the workbench and took out a cordless drill. A DeWalt 20-volt, the brushless model, in good condition. She set it on the counter with a charged battery snapped in place and a nut driver bit already chucked. Use this on the roof screws, Marta said. Torque setting 4. Don't go higher. She paused. Bring it back when you're done. Nora started to say something about payment. Marta had already gone back to her ledger. She spent 2 hours on the roof that afternoon, working along the south slope first because it got the most weather. She found 19 places where the screws had backed out, not 14. Marta had been right, of course. And 3 places where the sealant around the pipe boots had cracked and begun to separate. She set each screw at torque setting 4 as instructed, running the nut driver slow, feeling for the slight resistance that meant the washer had seated properly without crushing. She laid a neat bead of geocell around each pipe boot and smoothed it with a gloved fingertip. The work steadied her. It always had. There was something about the specific focus of physical repair, the narrowing of attention to a screw, a seam, a gap, that cleared everything else out of the way. She worked across the south slope and then the east, and by the time she came down the ladder, her legs were tired and her left shoulder was stiff from reaching, and the sun was 3 hours from going down. She opened the folded paper Marta had given her at the kitchen table. She'd begun calling the office that in her head, while the camp stove heated water. It said in Estelle's hand, "Third shelf, cold storage." Behind the paint cans, the board pulls forward. She went to look. The cold storage room had 4 shelves on the east wall, steel angle iron brackets with rough pine boards, the kind of shelving that gets added to piecemeal over decades so that the top shelf is different stock from the second shelf, which is different from the third. On the third shelf, pushed to the back behind 3 cans of oil-based primer, Sherwin-Williams, the orange and white label, the cans heavy and likely not fully dried even now, was a section of pine board, maybe 18 inches wide, that ran the full depth of the shelf, 20 inches or so. She pulled it forward. Behind it was a door, not a hidden door in the dramatic sense, no hinges, no hardware visible from the shelf side, but a simple pine door set flush into the wall, painted over at some point. The paint cracked now at the seam lines and around what turned out, when she pressed on the left side, to be a small spring latch. The door swung inward. She stood in the doorway with the mag light. The room beyond was small, maybe 12 feet by 8, with a ceiling that sloped down on the far end to about 5 feet because it sat under the eave of the pressing room's lower roof section. The walls were the same board and batten pine as the rest of the building, but insulated between the studs with what looked like original fiberglass bat that had yellowed and compressed with age. The floor was pine plank, 3-inch tongue and groove, swept clean. And the room was full. She stepped inside and turned the flashlight slowly. Along the left wall stood 7 pieces of furniture. Not 7 random pieces, 7 deliberately made, finished pieces, each one standing slightly apart from the next on small felt pads, each one with a small card tied to it with the same cotton kitchen twine that had bound the envelope bundle in the tin box. A blanket chest, the wood honey-colored and close-grained, the dovetail joints cut so precisely that she couldn't find the glue line with her thumbnail. A drop-leaf table with turned legs, the proportions exactly right, the leaves hanging straight. A set of 4 ladder-back chairs, she counted them, with woven rush seats in a pattern she didn't know the name for. A small writing desk, slant front, the inside fitted with pigeonholes, and a central door with a bead of rope molding around it. A cradle. The rockers curved from solid stock, not bent, the grain running perfectly with the curve of the piece. She walked to the blanket chest first and read the card. For Nora. Red oak, cut 1988, dried 3 years, built 1992, for whatever she needs to keep. She stood there for a moment, then she moved to the drop-leaf table. For Nora. Cherry from the east orchard tree that came down in the '89 storm. Every board from one tree. The writing desk. For Nora. Walnut. I thought about this one the longest. A desk is where you figure things out. The cradle. For Nora. In case. Whatever happens. In case. She had to stop at the cradle. She stood with the flashlight pointing at the floor and breathed carefully until her chest stopped doing what it was doing. Along the right wall were shelves, built-in shelves of the same tongue and groove pine as the floor, running from floor to the point where the ceiling slope became too low to stand under. On the shelves, 47 savings bonds in labeled envelopes. She counted them later, ranging in face value from $100 to $1,000, issued between 1979 and 2006. A tin box larger than the one in the pressing room, and inside it, when she opened it, a bank passbook from First National Bank of Millerton showing a savings account in the name of Estelle Marie Voss, with a balance, as of its last entry in March of 2009, of $61,400. There was also a deed. The deed was in a manila envelope with Mill, Nora, written on the front. She opened it and unfolded it with care. It was the original deed of transfer, drawn up by Hargrove and Associates, dated 1997, conveying the property at Rural Route 2, County Road 4, Harlan Springs, Dunmore County, Pennsylvania, identified by tax parcel number, meets and bounds, the whole legal machinery, to Nora Jean Vass. Outright, no conditions. Her name. Her property. Filed 27 years ago. She sat down on the pine plank floor with the deed in her hands. The flashlight beam caught the bottom of the blanket chest, and she could see the fine line where the tongue-and-groove floorboards met the chest's felt pads, and the way the grain of the red oak ran in the same direction as the grain of the pine floor. As though the chest had always been there, as though the room had been built around it. She sat for a long time. She found the long letter that evening. She had been working through the file folders from the roll-top desk, organizing them on the blotter in the late light from the west-facing pressing room window, which she'd propped open with a length of 2x4 she found near the press. The folders contained, among other things, receipts for every savings bond, organized by year, a log of repairs made to the building between 1991 and 2008, written in Estelle's hand with dates and dollar amounts and source of funds, a folder of correspondence with the Hargrove firm, and a folder labeled simply "For Reading" that held a single envelope, thicker than the others, sealed with a strip of packing tape that had dried and curled at the edges. On the front of the envelope, in Estelle's handwriting, "Nora, read this when you're ready. There is no rush." She made instant coffee. She sat in the ladder-back chair. She'd brought one in from the hidden room. And she opened it. The letter was 11 pages, written on both sides of unlined paper in Estelle's tall, careful hand, dated April 3rd, 2009, 7 months before Estelle died. Dear Nora, I've written this letter 4 times. The first 3 I burned, not because they were dishonest, but because they were too long in the wrong places and too short in the places that mattered. I am trying, with this version, to say what needs to be said plainly. I'm 80 years old, and my hand cramps after 3 pages, so you'll forgive me if I don't ornament. I want to start with the mill itself, because the mill is the context for everything else. Your great-grandfather, Aldous Vass, built this building in 1921, with timber he cut from the East Ridge and milled himself on a portable rig he rented from a man in Millerton named Copeland. The press was installed in 1922, a Howe rack and cloth unit, which is what you're looking at in the main room, and which still works, though the bladder on the hydraulic cylinder should be replaced before anyone tries to run it again. Aldous ran it as a cider operation until 1948, when his eyes went bad enough that he couldn't manage the press safely. He deeded it to your grandfather, Emil, in 1951, and Emil ran it until 1963, and then it sat. I inherited it from Emil when he died. I want you to know that I considered selling it for approximately 6 weeks in the spring of 1978, and then I walked through it one afternoon in March when the light was coming through that east window the way it does, and I understood that I was not going to sell it. Some decisions aren't decisions exactly, they're recognitions. I started using it again in 1981. Not as a cider mill, not yet, though I did eventually bring the press back into operation for a few seasons in the 1990s. In 1981, I began using the pressing room as a woodworking shop. I had learned to work wood from your great-uncle Theodore, who was a cabinet maker in Allentown for 40 years, and who taught me on Saturday mornings when I was in my 20s, and whom I have always credited with giving me the only real skill I ever had. I brought Theodore's tools here. Some of them are still in the pressing room, in the wooden box under the Hobart stand. I need to tell you about your mother. Your mother, Patricia, was my daughter, and I loved her with the specific, fierce, bewildered love that mothers have for daughters who are nothing like them. Patricia was impulsive and romantic and easily hurt and occasionally reckless, and she loved your father, Ray Vass. with the kind of love that uses everything up. When Ray died, and I know you know this, Nora, but I want you to hear my version. When Ray died of the aneurysm in 1991, Patricia did not recover. I don't mean that the way people usually mean it, as a soft way of saying someone grieved too long. I mean she was structurally altered by it, the way a piece of timber is altered by a check that runs from one face to the other. She still stood. She still functioned. But she was different all the way through. She drank, as you know. I am not going to paper over that. She drank and she made decisions that hurt you, and she was not the mother you deserved, and I am sorry for it, and I want you to know that I am not writing to ask you to forgive her or to feel differently about those years than you feel. I am writing to tell you something you don't know. In 1993, Patricia came to me and told me that she had a debt, a real one, money owed to a man named Deller who ran a loan operation out of Scranton and who was not patient about repayment. The amount was $8,400. I didn't ask where it came from. I paid it. I paid it from the savings I had put aside for the mill roof, which is why the roof went another 11 years before it got replaced. In 1995, she came again. This time the amount was $3,200, and the creditor was different, but the situation was the same. I paid it. In 1997, she came a third time, and I told her I would pay the debt. It was $5,100, a different source entirely, but that I needed something from her in return. I needed her to sign a document with Hargrove, relinquishing any future claim to the mill in exchange for the debt payment. She signed it. She was not angry about it, I think, because she knew by then that she would not be well enough to do anything with the property, and also because she understood, the way she sometimes understood things when she was clear, that I was trying to protect something for you. She died 8 months later. You know this. What I want to tell you, what I should have found a way to tell you before now, is that every year from 1991 until last year, I have put money aside specifically for you. The savings bonds on the shelf in that room represent 18 years of deliberate, quiet saving. The bank account is what remained after I paid the furniture materials and the mill maintenance and Patricia's debts and my own expenses. I want to be precise about this because I know you have not had an easy time of it financially, and I do not want you to receive this as charity. It is not charity. It is what I saved of what was yours, held in trust against the time when you would need it. I could not give it to you directly while certain people knew about it, Raymond specifically, and Raymond's son, Dale, who is worse than Raymond in the ways that matter. They would have found a way to contest it, to litigate it, to reduce it to nothing through the process of contesting it. Raymond tried to break the will when Emile died. He would have tried again. So I hid it. I hid it in a room, and I hid the room, and I hid the deed in the desk, and I filed the codicil with the most careful lawyer I knew, and I trusted that you would find your way here and find your way through. I need to tell you one more thing. When you were 7 years old, you came here for a week in August, the summer before 2nd grade. You remember the orchard, I think. You told me once, years later, that you remembered the smell of the press room and the sound the apple crates made when you dragged them across the concrete floor. What you don't know, what you couldn't know because you were 7, is that during that week I made a decision about you. We were sitting on the back step one evening, you and I, after dinner, and a thunderstorm was coming up over the ridge and the light had gone that particular green gold that precedes a storm here in the valley. You were watching it very carefully, not afraid, just watching. And I asked you what you saw and you said, and I wrote this in my journal that same night, so I have the exact words. You said, "I see it getting ready." I understood something about you in that moment. I understood that you were a person who paid attention to what was about to happen rather than what had already happened. And I decided, sitting on that step, that whatever I managed to save in this life was going to be yours. Not Raymond's, not Dale's, not the bank's, yours. Because the world goes better when careful people have something to work with. The mill needs work. The press needs the bladder replaced, as I said. The roof is manageable if you stay ahead of it. The cold storage shelving needs new boards on the 3rd and 4th levels. Use 2x10 pine, kiln-dried. The local mill in Stone Ridge carries it. The orchard has 11 trees worth saving and 7 that are past saving. You'll know which are which by the bark at the base. In the bottom of the wooden box under the Hobart stand you will find Theodore's draw knife and his set of bench chisels wrapped in oilcloth. They are sharp. He kept them sharp because he said a dull tool is an argument with the wood, and Theodore had no patience for arguments. Use them. Make something. It helps. I am not afraid of dying, Nora. I want you to know that. I am sorry not to be there when you arrive, but I am not sorry for what I'm leaving. I have loved this valley and this building and these trees, and I have loved you from the step that August evening, from your father's eyes, from your stubbornness that is entirely your mother's and not mine at all, whatever I said to Marta Fenn. Come home, fix what's broken, let the rest go. I loved you every single day, Nora, every single one. With everything I have, your grandmother, Estelle, April 3rd, 2009, Harlan Springs, Pennsylvania. Nora set the last page on the blotter. Outside, the light had shifted. It was the long, flat light of early evening, the kind that comes sideways through windows and makes ordinary objects. A tin of throat lozenges, a clay apple pot, 3 pencil stubs. Look like they have been considered and placed by someone who cared about the arrangement. She did not move for a long time. She thought about the step and the green gold light before the storm, and being 7 years old and not afraid. She thought about her mother and the word structurally and the way a timber can check all the way through and still stand. She thought about Theodore's chisels in oilcloth wrapped sharp. She read the letter again, all 11 pages. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in its envelope and held the envelope against her chest with both hands. She ate the last of the peanut butter from the jar with a spoon, standing at the office window in the last of the light, watching a pair of deer move through the far end of the orchard with the particular unhurried deliberateness of animals that have decided a place is safe. She slept that night on the pine floor of the small room, between the blanket chest and the drop-leaf cherry table, with the letter beside her and the quilt over her and the flashlight within reach. She slept without dreaming, or if she dreamed, she didn't remember it. If you've made it this far into Nora's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The car came on a Wednesday. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of tires on the gravel track, the particular crunch that meant a heavy vehicle moving slowly, the way people drive when they're looking at something rather than going somewhere. She was on the roof at the time, setting the last of the geocell beads around the north slope pipe boots, and she turned and looked down to the lot. It was a black Lincoln Navigator, 2 or 3 years old, clean in the particular way of rental cars or corporate fleet vehicles. Not showroom clean, but professionally maintained. The kind of clean that means someone else is responsible for it. It pulled into the gravel lot and stopped and sat for a moment with the engine running. The man who got out was perhaps 45, trim, in a charcoal blazer over a blue Oxford shirt, no tie, dark trousers that were not appropriate for gravel. He had good hair, which Nora noticed only because good hair in Harlan Springs was unusual, and he carried a slim portfolio under one arm. He stood beside the Navigator and looked at the building with an expression she couldn't read from the roof. Interested, she thought, but not surprised. As though he had already looked at a photograph and was now confirming the photograph was accurate. He saw her on the roof and raised a hand. She climbed down the ladder. "Mrs. Vass," he said. His hand was out before she reached the bottom rung. She took it once and let go. Ms. Vass, my name is Todd Fenner. I'm with a development company called Meridian Capital Group out of Philadelphia." He opened the portfolio and produced a card, which he held out with 2 fingers. She took it. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, a logo that was an abstracted letter, Spes as Im. We've been doing a land study in this corridor, County Road 4, Route 11, the surrounding acreage, and your property came up as one of the more interesting parcels in the study area. Interesting how? Nora said. Square footage, road access, existing structure. The millstone history gives it a heritage angle that's commercially attractive. He smiled in a way that was practiced but not unpleasant. We'd be interested in having a conversation about acquisition, if you're open to it. I'm not selling. Fenner nodded, as though this was an expected opening position rather than an answer. Of course, I completely understand. I just ask you to take a look at what we're prepared to offer before making a final determination. He produced a single sheet of paper from the portfolio and held it out. She looked at it. The offer was $118,000. She handed it back. I'm not selling, she said again. Fenner took the paper back with the same unhurried manner. He looked at the building once more, then at the orchard, then back at her. He tucked the paper away and closed the portfolio. Ms. Vass, he said, I want to be straightforward with you. There are zoning conversations happening at the township level right now. A proposed reclassification of the Route 11 corridor that would affect agricultural use designations in this area. If that reclassification moves forward, properties like this one may face carrying costs that make maintenance difficult for individual owners. I just want you to have the full picture. He smiled again. Our offer remains open. Take some time. He got back in the Navigator and drove back down the gravel track, moving slowly, the same careful speed as arriving, still looking. Nora stood in the lot until she couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then she sat down on the bottom rung of the aluminum extension ladder and looked at Todd Fenner's business card. Heavy stock. Embossed M. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She put it in her jacket pocket next to the survey map from the roll-top desk. She sat there for a while with the smell of geocell on her gloves and the late afternoon coming in over the ridge. And she thought about the word reclassification and what it would cost to fight a zoning review, and what 206R could do against any of that, and whether her grandmother had known something like this was coming, and whether the careful lawyer in Millerton had filed the deed in the right places, and whether the savings bonds on the shelf in that room were real and were hers and could not be taken. She didn't have answers to most of those questions yet. She had $400 in a passbook account that might or might not still be accessible. She had a deed. She had a letter from her grandmother that said, "Come home and fix what's broken and let the rest go." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and sat very still. The deer had come back to the far end of the orchard. 2 of them, or maybe a third now. It was getting hard to see in the long shadows. She got up and went inside. The letter came on a Friday, 11 days after Todd Fenner left his card. Nora found it in the mailbox at the end of the gravel track, a proper mailbox now, the old one having been so rusted through that the door had simply fallen off when she'd tried to open it. And Marta Fenn had driven out with a replacement the day after Nora mentioned it. A galvanized steel rural box with the name Vass stenciled on the side in black paint. No charge, Marta had said, because she'd ordered 3 for the store and only needed 2. The letter was in a window envelope, the kind that shows a typed address through a cellophane panel, and it was from the law offices of Cranich and Stoll, attorneys at law, with an address in Millerton. She opened it standing in the gravel lot with the morning sun just beginning to burn the mist off the low ground between the apple trees. Re. Property tax parcel. 414089. 4. Harlan Springs Township. Notice of zoning review petition. An opportunity to respond. The letter informed her that a petition had been filed with the Harlan Springs Township Zoning Board by Meridian Capital Group, LLC, requesting reclassification of certain properties along the County Road 4 corridor from agricultural residential AR to commercial mixed use, CMU. Her property was one of 8 named in the petition. A public hearing was scheduled for Monday, April 14th at 7:00 p.m. in the Harlan Springs Township Municipal Building. Property owners were invited to attend and present comment. Written responses could be submitted to the board clerk by April 12th. The letter was dated March 28th. Today was April 4th. She folded it and put it back in the envelope and stood in the lot for a long time. Then she went inside and made coffee and sat at the office desk with the letter and the survey map and the deed and a legal pad she'd found in one of the roll-top drawers, and she began to write down what she knew. She knew the mill was hers, filed and deeded in 1997. She knew Estelle had paid off 3 debts to protect it. She knew the building needed work, but was structurally sound. She had spent the past week not just fixing the roof, but walking every inch of the foundation, checking the sill plates, testing the floor joists in the pressing room with a carpenter's level, and a moisture meter Marta had loaned her without comment. She knew the cold storage shelving needed replacement boards and the Hobart mixer probably didn't work, and the bladder on the hydraulic press cylinder was shot. And she knew that none of those things mattered if Meridian Capital got the zoning changed and forced a tax reassessment that made holding the property impossible. She knew she had $206 in cash, which had gone down to $171 after the mailbox and a bag of rice and 2 cans of black beans and a jar of store-brand instant coffee from the co-op. She knew the passbook account said $61,400, but she had not yet tried to access it because she did not know what would happen if she walked into First National Bank of Millerton and presented a passbook from 2009 in the name of a woman who had been dead for 9 years. She knew she needed help. She drove to Marta Fenn's hardware store just after 9 and found Marta behind the counter with a parts catalog open in front of her and a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow. Marta looked up when the bell rang and said, without preamble, "You got the zoning letter." Nora stopped. "How did you know?" "Because Fenner's people filed the petition 3 weeks ago, and the township clerk is my second cousin, and she told me about it the same day." Marta closed the catalog. "I've been waiting for you to come in." Nora set the letter on the counter. Marta read it without picking it up, her eyes moving across the lines in that level, methodical way she had. Then she looked up and said, "You planning to fight it?" "I don't know how." "George Hargrove knows how." "The lawyer?" "The same. He filed your deed. He knows every square inch of the township zoning code because he wrote half of it back when he was on the planning commission in the 80s. He's retired now, mostly, but he still takes cases when they're worth taking." Marta reached under the counter and came up with a business card, which she handed to Nora. Plain white cardstock, black ink, no embossing. George L. Hargrove, Cider, a phone number, an address on Pickle Road. "Call him," Marta said. "Tell him Estelle's granddaughter needs help with a zoning challenge. He'll see you." Nora looked at the card. "I don't have money for a lawyer. George doesn't work that way, not for cases like this." Marta poured herself a fresh cup of coffee from the hot plate in the back room and came back. "You want to know what Estelle did for this town?" Nora said yes. She paid for the new heating system at the elementary school in 2001 when the boiler went out in January, and the school board didn't have the budget and the state wouldn't release emergency funds for 6 weeks. She wrote a check for $11,200 and told the superintendent it was an anonymous donation. But the superintendent told his wife, and his wife told everyone. She bought the Halloran family's mortgage from the bank in 2004 when Jim Halloran got laid off from the plant, and they were 3 months behind. Bought it outright, held the note, and forgave it 2 years later when Jim got back on his feet. She lent the fire company $8,000 for a used ladder truck in 1998 and never asked for it back. She tutored kids in math for free every Thursday night at the library for 11 years. She drove Pauline Kurtz to dialysis in Scranton twice a week for the last 18 months of Pauline's life and wouldn't take gas money. Marta paused. She took a sip of her coffee. "Nobody talked about it much," she said, "because Estelle didn't want them to, but people knew. and people remember. She looked at Nora. You go to that hearing and you tell them who you are and what you're planning to do with that building. And you'll find out how much people remember. Nora sat with that for a moment. Then she said, What am I planning to do with it? Marta looked at her with those level gray eyes. I don't know, Nora. What are you planning to do with it? Nora didn't answer right away. She turned the business card over in her hands. She thought about the room behind the cold storage shelf and the blanket chest with the card that said for whatever she needs to keep, and the walnut writing desk with the card that said a desk is where you figure things out. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm not selling it. That's enough to start with, Marta said. George Hargrove's office was a small white clapboard house on Pickle Road with a detached garage that had been converted at some point in the past into a single-room workspace with a wood stove and 2 walls of bookshelves and a partner's desk positioned under the only window. Hargrove himself was a tall man in his late 70s, thin in the shoulders but not frail, with a shock of white hair that stood up at odd angles and a pair of reading glasses on a braided cord around his neck. He wore canvas trousers and a wool cardigan over a faded denim shirt, and when Nora arrived, she'd called from Marta's store and he'd told her to come at 2. He was standing at the desk with a surveyor's map unrolled in front of him, holding the corners down with a coffee mug, a stapler, a smooth riverstone, and a pair of needle-nose pliers. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. Nora Vass, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. You look like your grandmother, he said, mostly around the eyes. Come in. Sit if you want, or stand if you'd rather. I've been sitting all morning and my back's tired of it. She came in and stood. He rolled the map up and set it aside, and then turned his full attention to her in a way that reminded her, suddenly and sharply, of Estelle. The way some people look at you not to assess or judge, but simply to see. Marta called me, he said. Told me about the zoning petition. I pulled the file this morning. He gestured to a manila folder on the desk. I also pulled the original deed and the codicil and the correspondence I had with your grandmother between 1997 and 2009. You want to see any of it? Yes, Nora said. He handed her the folder. Inside were copies of everything. The deed, the codicil, a letter from Estelle dated August 1997, in which she explained, in her careful handwriting, that she was transferring the mill property to her granddaughter in order to protect it from future contestation by her son Raymond, and that she understood the transfer was irrevocable and she wished it to be so. There was also a letter from Hargrove to Estelle, dated September 1997, confirming that the codicil had been filed with the county recorder and that the deed had been recorded and that the transfer was complete and legal and beyond challenge provided no fraud or undue influence could be demonstrated, which Hargrove did not believe could be. There was a third letter, dated March 2009, from Estelle to Hargrove. It was short. George, if Nora comes to you, help her. She won't ask unless she needs it. When she asks, don't make her ask twice. Thank you for 30 years of competence and discretion. You are a careful man, and the world needs more of you. Estelle Nora read it twice. Then she handed the folder back. Hargrove set it on the desk and looked at her. The zoning petition is procedurally sound, he said. Meridian filed it correctly, named the properties correctly, requested the hearing within the allowable time frame. The Township Board has discretion to approve or deny based on public comment and their own assessment of community impact. But Meridian has resources, and Meridian has done this before in other townships, and they know how to make a case. So I can't win, Nora said. I didn't say that. Hargrove pulled the reading glasses off his neck and set them on the desk. I said Meridian knows how to make a case, so do I. The question is what case we're making. Meridian's case is economic development, increased tax base, job creation, modernization. It's a clean case and it polls well with boards. Our case has to be better. What's our case? Hargrove looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do with the mill?" It was the second time that day someone had asked her that question. This time she had an answer, or the beginning of one. "Fix it," she said. "Use it. My grandmother left me furniture in a hidden room and tools in a wooden box and a letter that said, 'Make something. I'm going to make something.'" What kind of something? She thought about that. She thought about Theodore's chisels wrapped in oilcloth and the blanket chest with dovetails so tight she couldn't find the glue line and the drop-leaf cherry table with the grain running perfectly because every board came from the same tree. "A workshop," she said. "A place where people can learn to build things. Furniture, maybe. Small woodworking. The kind of thing my grandmother did." She paused. "I don't know if that's enough." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Estelle taught woodworking to 11 people in this township over the years. Taught them for free, in that building on weekends. Some of them still have the furniture they built. One of them, a man named Carl Dreyer, built the pergola behind the township library with timber Estelle milled for him in 2003. Another, a woman named Susan Oyer, makes shaker boxes now and sells them at the farmer's market in Millerton every Saturday. Estelle didn't talk about it much, but people knew." He picked up a pen and wrote something on a yellow legal pad. "If you stand up at that hearing and tell the board you're planning to reopen the mill as a community workshop," he said, "and if the people Estelle taught stand up and say what she did for them, and if Marta Fenn and I and a few others stand up and tell the board what Estelle did for this town when nobody was asking her to, Meridian's case starts to look a lot thinner." He looked up. "But you have to mean it, Nora. You can't say you're going to do it and then walk away. The board will approve the reclassification the minute you leave, and Meridian will be back with a purchase offer the day after." "I mean it," Nora said. "Then we have a case." She left Hargrove's office at 4:30 with a list of things to do. Call Carl Dreyer, call Susan Oyer, write a one-page statement of intent for the board, come back on April 12th with the statement so Hargrove could review it. And a feeling in her chest that was not quite hope, but was not despair either. It was something steadier, something like a screw set at the right torque, seated properly, not going anywhere. She drove back to the mill in the long light of late afternoon and parked in the gravel lot and sat in the Forester for a moment, looking at the building. The metal roof she had resealed, the oiled hinges on the front door, the apple trees in their uneven line, some worth saving and some not, the way Estelle had said. She got out and went inside. She was standing at the office desk, rereading Estelle's long letter for perhaps the 10th time, when she heard the sound of tires on gravel again. Not a heavy vehicle this time, something smaller, older. She went to the front window and looked out. It was a pickup truck, a late 90s Chevy S10, pale blue, with a cracked windshield and a wooden toolbox bolted into the bed. It pulled into the lot and stopped, and a young woman got out, maybe 24, 25, thin in the shoulders, wearing a canvas jacket too large for her and jeans with the cuffs rolled up and work boots that had been resoled at least once. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a duffel bag over one shoulder, and she stood beside the truck for a moment, looking at the building the way people look at places they're not sure they're allowed to be. Nora went out. The young woman turned. She had a hard, careful face, the kind of face that came from years of not expecting kindness. "I'm sorry," the young woman said. "I saw the building from the road and I don't know what I thought. I'll go." "You looking for work?" Nora said. The young woman blinked. Yeah, I am. I've been doing framing crew work in Scranton, but the job ended and I'm trying to get down to Maryland, to my sister's place. But my truck's making a noise I don't like, and I thought if I could find a few days' work, I could get it looked at before I keep driving." She stopped. "Sorry, that's more than you asked." "What kind of noise?" "Grinding, from the front passenger side. Happens when I brake." "Caliper, probably," Nora said. "Or the rotor's warped. You know how to use a socket set?" The young woman looked at her. "Yes." "You know how to replace shelving boards?" "Yes." Nora looked at the truck, then at the young woman, then at the duffel bag. She thought about being 59 with $171 in her pocket and 7 boxes on a tarp in a carport. She thought about Marta Fenn handing her a drill and saying, "Bring it back when you're done." She thought about Estelle's letter, the line that said the world goes better when careful people have something to work with. "I can't pay much," Nora said, "but I've got a cold storage room that needs the shelving rebuilt, and I've got a place you can sleep that's dry, and I can make you dinner if you don't mind rice and beans." The young woman stared at her. "What's your name?" Nora said. "Claire," the young woman said. "Claire Hewitt." "I'm Nora Vass. You want the work or not?" Claire Hewitt set her duffel bag down slowly. "Yes," she said. "I want the work." "Good. We'll look at your truck after dinner. I've got a jack and stands in the Subaru, and if it's the caliper, we can get the part in Millerton tomorrow." Nora turned back toward the building. "Come on, I'll show you where you're sleeping." She led Claire through the main room, down the narrow hallway to the small room behind the cold storage shelf. Claire stopped in the doorway and looked at the furniture, the blanket chest, the drop-leaf table, the ladder-back chairs, the writing desk, the cradle. "You made all this?" Claire said. "My grandmother did." Claire walked to the blanket chest and ran her hand along the top, feeling the smoothness of the finish. She crouched down and looked at the dovetails. "This is perfect work," she said quietly. "I know." Claire stood. She looked around the room once more, and then at Nora. "Why are you helping me?" Nora thought about that. She thought about the answer she could give, the easy answer, and then she thought about the true one. "Because somebody helped me," she said, "and because I think that's how it's supposed to work." They rebuilt the cold storage shelving over the weekend, pulled the old boards down, cut new 2x10 pine to length with a circular saw Nora borrowed from Marta, sanded the edges, and bolted them back onto the steel angle iron brackets with lag screws and washers. Claire worked carefully and without wasted motion, the way people work when they've been doing it long enough that the tools feel like extensions of their hands. She didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. On Saturday evening, after they'd finished the third shelf, they pulled the front wheel off Claire's truck and found that the caliper piston had seized, and the rotor was scored badly enough that it needed replacement. Nora drove to the Napa in Millerton on Sunday morning and bought both parts, $87 total, which left her with $84, and they installed them in the gravel lot while the sun came over the ridge and a pair of crows worked the far end of the orchard. On Sunday night, Nora made rice and beans on the camp stove, and they ate sitting on the long pine tables in the main room. And Claire asked what Nora was planning to do with the building. Nora told her. Claire listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need help at the hearing?" "I don't know yet. I'm good at talking to boards," Claire said. "I had to go in front of a zoning board in Scranton last year when the landlord tried to get our building condemned so he could sell it to a developer. We won." She paused. "I'm just saying, if you need someone to stand up and say this place matters, I can do that." Nora looked at her. "You've been here 3 days." "I know, but I've seen what you're doing, and I've seen the furniture your grandmother made. That's enough." On Monday morning, Claire's truck started without the grinding noise. Claire loaded her duffel into the bed and stood beside the driver's door for a moment, looking at the mill. "If you still need help when I get back from Maryland," she said. I could come back for a few weeks. I don't have anything lined up after my sister's. Come back, Nora said. Claire nodded. She got in the truck and drove down the gravel track, and Nora stood in the lot and watched until the sound of the engine faded. Then she went inside and sat at the office desk and wrote her statement of intent for the zoning board. She wrote it in longhand on a legal pad, crossed out half of it, and rewrote it. She took it to Hargrove's office on April 12th at 2 in the afternoon, and Hargrove read it without expression and then handed it back and said, "Good. Don't change a word." The Harlan Springs Township Municipal Building was a single-story brick structure on Route 11 with a meeting room that seated maybe 40 people in folding chairs and a raised platform at the front where the 5-member zoning board sat behind a laminate-topped table. Nora arrived at 6:45 and found the room already half full. Marta Fenn in the 3rd row, George Hargrove in the 2nd, a man she didn't recognize in the 1st row with a toolbox at his feet, and a woman in her 60s with a canvas tote bag that had shaker boxes stenciled on the side. Todd Fenner was there too, sitting in the back row with 2 other people in business attire, a slim laptop open on his knees. The board chair was a woman named Evelyn Moss, somewhere in her mid-60s, with silver hair cut short and a pair of reading glasses on a chain. She called the meeting to order at 7 and read the petition aloud. Meridian Capital Group, LLC, requests reclassification of parcels 41 EW089 CB0211 through 41 CB0089 C0IY8 from agricultural residential to commercial mixed use for purposes of economic development and expanded commercial opportunity within the Route 11 corridor. She asked if representatives of Meridian Capital wished to speak. Todd Fenner stood. He was polished and calm and made his case in 8 minutes. Economic impact study showing potential job creation, increased tax revenue for the township, modernization of underutilized properties, alignment with regional development goals. He had slides on the laptop, though there was no projector in the room, so he simply described them. He did not say anything false. He did not need to. When he finished, Evelyn Moss thanked him and asked if any property owners wished to speak in opposition. George Hargrove stood. He did not have slides. He had a single piece of paper, which he did not look at. Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is George Hargrove. I represent Nora Voss, owner of parcel 41 00089 14, the property commonly known as the Vass Cider Mill. Ms. Vass opposes the reclassification and wishes to address the board directly. Evelyn Moss nodded. Ms. Vass, please come forward. Nora stood. She walked to the front of the room and turned to face the board. She had the legal pad in her hand, but she didn't open it. My name is Nora Voss, she said. My grandmother, Estelle Voss, left me the cider mill when she died. I'm planning to reopen it as a community woodworking workshop, a place where people can learn to build furniture and work with tools and make things that last. My grandmother taught woodworking in that building for years. She believed in teaching people skills they could use. I'm planning to do the same. She paused. Her hands were steady. I know Meridian's offer sounds good on paper, jobs and taxes and development. But what they're not telling you is that once you reclassify those parcels, you lose the ability to decide what gets built there. You lose local control. And you lose places like the mill, places that have been part of this township for 100 years, places that were built by people who lived here and who cared about what they were building. She looked at the board. I'm asking you not to reclassify my property. I'm asking you to let me do what my grandmother did. Build something that matters, teach people who want to learn, and give this township something it can't buy from a development company in Philadelphia. She sat down. Evelyn Moss looked at her for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, Ms. Voss. Does anyone else wish to speak? The man in the first row with the toolbox stood. He was in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, with calloused hands and a weathered face. My name is Carl Dreyer, he said. Estelle Vass taught me how to use a mortise chisel and a block plane in that building in 2002. I didn't know anything about woodworking before that. She taught me for free, every Saturday for 6 months. And when I finished, she helped me build a pergola for the township library. It's still standing. I'm asking the board to vote no on the reclassification. He sat. The woman with the tote bag stood. My name is Susan Oyer. Estelle Vass taught me how to make shaker boxes in 2005. I sell them now. I make my living from it. She never charged me a cent. She said teaching someone a skill was the best thing you could do with your time. Susan looked at the board. Vote no. She sat. Marta Fenn stood. Marta Fenn. I've run the hardware store in this township for 34 years. Estelle Vass paid for the elementary school heating system in 2001 when the boiler failed. She bought Jim Halloran's mortgage in 2004 and forgave it. She lent the fire company $8,000 in 1998. She drove Pauline Kurtz to dialysis twice a week for 18 months. She didn't do any of it for recognition. She did it because that's what neighbors do. Marta's voice was level and clear. If you reclassify that property, you're telling this township that none of that matters. I'm asking you to vote no. She sat. One by one, 7 more people stood. A retired electrician who said Estelle had lent him tools when his shop burned down. A plumber who said Estelle had paid for his daughter's textbooks when he was out of work. A woman who ran the garden center and said Estelle had given her seedlings every spring for the community garden. A man who played cards with Estelle at the library and said she'd never missed a Thursday in 11 years. By the time the last person sat down, Todd Fenner had closed his laptop. Evelyn Moss looked at the board. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "The board will take a 15-minute recess to confer." They came back in 12 minutes. Evelyn Moss sat and folded her hands on the table. "The board has voted," she said, 3-2, to deny the petition for reclassification. Parcels 41, R01, R211 through 41, 089, R218 will remain zoned agricultural residential. The decision is final and effective immediately. The room was silent for a beat. Then Carl Dreyer started clapping, and Susan Oyer joined him, and then the whole room was clapping, and Nora sat very still, with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed. When she opened them, George Hargrove was standing beside her chair. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly. Nora couldn't speak. She nodded. Todd Fenner left without speaking to anyone. By the time Nora got back to the mill, it was nearly 10. The gravel lot was dark except for the wedge of light from the office window, which she'd left on, and she sat in the Forester for a moment before getting out, just breathing. Then she went inside. She made coffee. She sat at the office desk and opened the bottom drawer and took out the folder labeled "For Reading." And from it she took the long letter, all 11 pages, and she read it again, slowly, in the light from the single bulb overhead. When she finished, she folded it carefully and put it back in the folder. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and took out the business card Marta had given her, George L. Hargrove, Esqueto, and set it on the blotter next to Todd Fenner's embossed card. She looked at both of them for a moment. Then she picked up Fenner's card and dropped it in the trash. She turned off the light and went out to the pressing room and stood in the dark, listening to the building settle around her. Outside, the apple trees moved in a wind she couldn't feel. She thought about Claire Hewitt, driving south toward Maryland with a truck that didn't grind anymore. She thought about Carl Dreyer and Susan Oyer and Marta Fenn and the 7 other people who had stood up in that room and said what Estelle had done. She thought about her grandmother, 80 years old with a cramping hand, writing 11 pages to say come home and fix what's broken and let the rest go. She went to the wooden box under the Hobart stand and opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, were Theodore's tools. A draw knife with a curved blade and 2 handles, the edge still sharp. A set of bench chisels in a canvas roll, 6 of them, ranging from a 1/4 inch to an 1.5 inches, each one honed to a polish. A small block plane, the sole flat and true, the iron set fine. A combination square, a marking gauge. A mallet turned from a single piece of hickory, the handle smooth with decades of use. She lifted the draw knife and felt the weight of it. Then she set it back in the box and closed the lid and stood in the dark pressing room for a long time, thinking about what she was going to build first. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in early May, Nora opened the mill. She didn't call it an opening exactly. She put a handwritten sign on the front door that said, "Community Woodworking Workshop, Saturdays 9 to 4, all skill levels. Welcome," and she propped the door open with a length of 2x4, and she set out Theodore's tools on the long pine tables in the main room, and she waited. Carl Dreyer arrived first, at 8:50, with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee. Susan Oyer came 10 minutes later with a box of shaker boxes she'd made to show people what was possible. Marta Fenn came at 9:30 with a younger man Nora didn't recognize, who Marta introduced as her nephew, just back from 2 years working on a framing crew in Pittsburgh and looking to learn finish work. By 10, there were 9 people in the room. Nora stood at the front and looked at them, Carl and Susan and Marta's nephew and 6 others, ranging in age from maybe 19 to maybe 70, some with tools and some without, all of them quiet and waiting. "My name is Nora Vass," she said. "This building belonged to my grandmother, Estelle. She taught people how to work with wood in this room for a long time. I'm going to try to do the same. If you've never used a chisel before, that's fine. If you've been building furniture for 40 years, that's fine too. We'll figure it out together." She picked up the block plane from the table and held it up. "This was my great-uncle Theodore's plane," she said. "He was a cabinet maker in Allentown for 40 years, and he taught my grandmother, and my grandmother taught people here. Tools like this last because people take care of them. We're going to take care of them, and we're going to take care of each other." She set the plane down. "Let's start." By noon, Carl Dreyer was teaching a man named Howell how to cut a mortise. Susan Oyer was showing a teenage girl how to fit a shaker box lid. Marta's nephew was working on a small picture frame under Nora's direction, learning to miter corners with a backsaw and a miter box. The room smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and coffee, and the light from the high east window moved across the concrete floor in its slow arc. And every so often, someone would ask a question, and someone else would answer, and the work continued. At 2 in the afternoon, a pale blue Chevy S10 pulled into the gravel lot. Nora looked up. Claire Hewitt got out, duffel bag over her shoulder, and walked to the open door. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the room, the people at the tables, the tools, the work in progress. Nora set down the chisel she was holding and walked over. "You came back," Nora said. "I said I would. You want a job?" Claire looked at her. "Yes." "Good. There's a cot in the back room and the pay's not much, but you can eat here and sleep here and learn here, and when you're ready, I'll help you build something of your own." Nora paused. "Sound fair?" Claire's throat worked. She nodded. "All right," Nora said. "Come on. I'll show you what we're working on." She led Claire into the room, and Carl looked up and nodded, and Susan smiled, and Marta's nephew said, "Hey." And Claire set her duffel bag down by the wall and picked up a piece of sandpaper and got to work. At 4, Nora thanked everyone, and they packed up their tools and swept the floor and filed out one by one, Carl and Susan and Marta's nephew and the others, until it was just Nora and Claire standing in the main room in the late light. "You hungry?" Nora said. "Yeah. I've got rice and beans, and I bought eggs yesterday, so we can do better than last time." Claire smiled, just a little. "That sounds good." They ate at the long pine table and didn't talk much. And when they were finished, Claire washed the dishes in the utility sink, and Nora dried them. And then Claire went to the back room to unpack, and Nora went to the office. She sat at the roll-top desk and opened the bottom drawer and took out a small frame she'd built the week before. A simple four-sided frame, mitered corners, a piece of glass from the hardware store cut to fit. Inside the frame was a photograph of Estelle, taken sometime in the late 1990s, standing in front of the mill with a tool apron on and a plane in her hand, smiling the way she smiled when she thought no one was looking. Nora had found the photograph in one of the envelopes in the hidden room, tucked in with the savings bonds. She carried the frame out to the main room and mounted it on the wall beside the east window, at eye level, where the morning light would catch it. She stepped back and looked at it for a moment. Then she turned and looked at the room, the long tables, the press under its tarp, the tools laid out and waiting for tomorrow. Outside, through the open door, the apple trees stood in their uneven line, some worth saving and some not, the evening settling around them. She thought about what Marta had said, weeks ago now, in the back room of the hardware store. The world goes better when careful people have something to work with. She thought about her grandmother, writing by hand at this desk, 11 pages, the light from this same window falling across the paper. She thought about Claire in the back room, unpacking, staying. A soft sound came from the pressing room. Claire moving something, a board set down, a quiet footstep. The sound of someone settling in. Nora walked to the front door and stood in the doorway, looking out at the gravel lot and the orchard beyond, and the ridge going dark against the sky. She thought about what she would say if someone asked her why she'd stayed, why she hadn't taken the money, hadn't walked away, hadn't let Meridian Capital have the building and the land and the quiet history that came with it. And she thought the answer, if she was being honest, wasn't complicated. You stay because someone loved you enough to leave you something worth keeping, and you keep it because that's what love asks you to do. Not the easy thing, not the profitable thing. The right thing. She stood in the doorway a while longer, watching the light go. Then she went back inside. She sat at the office desk and opened the top drawer and took out the blank ledger she'd bought in Millerton the week before. A spiral-bound book with a blue cover, the kind her grandmother had used. She opened it to the first page and wrote in careful block letters, the date, May 10th. Below that, workshop attendance, 9. Below that, tools used, block plane, chisels. 3. Backsaw, miter box, mortise chisel, marking gauge. Below that, notes. Carl teaching mortise work. Susan teaching box lids. Claire return. Hired. She paused. Then she wrote one more line. Beginning. She closed the ledger and set it on the blotter beside Estelle's long letter and the photograph of the two of them on the back step. The summer Nora was 7, the stormlight coming in green gold over the ridge. Outside, the apple trees had gone still. Inside, the light from the single bulb overhead caught the brass corners of the roll-top desk and the smooth curve of the clay apple pot and the edge of the framed photograph on the wall. And the mill settled around her with the particular quiet of a place that knows it's going to be here tomorrow. Nora turned off the light. She walked through the main room, past the long tables and the press in the east window where the morning would come. And she went to the back room where Claire was already asleep on the cot, breathing slow and even, and she climbed the narrow stairs she'd found behind a panel in the cold storage room. Stairs that led to a small loft space under the eave, just big enough for a bed and a lamp and a window that looked out over the orchard. She lay down on the bed she'd made from the blanket chest's quilt and a pillow she'd bought at the co-op, and she looked out the window at the stars beginning to show, and the dark line of the ridge and the pale shapes of the apple trees below. She thought about her grandmother's letter, the line that said, "I loved you every single day." She thought about Marta and George and Carl and Susan, and the 7 others who had stood in that hearing room and said this matters. She thought about Claire, downstairs, staying. And she thought about the workshop tomorrow and the people who would come, and the tools they would use and the things they would build. Small things, most of them. Picture frames and boxes and joints that fit, but things that would last. Things made carefully. Things worth keeping. Home isn't where you end up. It's where you stop running and start building something that matters. She closed her eyes. The mill stood quiet around her, and the apple trees moved slightly in a wind that had no name, and the stars turned overhead the way they always had. And somewhere far off, a dog barked once and stopped, and the night settled in, and Nora slept.